Reversing centuries of tradition, Pope Francis allows Mass in indigenous languages. Plus, 50 years after his death, Colombians remember its first guerrilla priest, Camilo Torres. Thanks for joining us for teleSur English. I'm Cody Weddle, and this is From the South. To begin today, we begin in the southern Mexican state of Chiapas. That's where Pope Francis is given the official go-ahead for Mass and other Catholic services to be delivered in indigenous languages. Now, on the third full day of his visit, the Pope also authorized the appointment of indigenous deacons and apologized for the Church's role in the exclusion and exploitation of indigenous peoples. Now, before a large congregation, Francis held a Mass in 3 indigenous languages as well as Spanish. Now we're going to take a listen in some of those first Masses to be held in indigenous languages in Mexico. In this case, Tzotzil.
Oita yonton ante kolelale, ante lekilkush lekale. Tehtatik Dios, yaya ita yotan teswokol teslumal.
Often, your people have been systematically and structurally misunderstood and excluded.
Comprendidos y excluidos de la sociedad.
Some have considered your values, culture, and traditions to be inferior. Others, intoxicated by power, money, and market trends, have stolen your land or contaminated it.
Por el poder, el dinero y las leyes de mercado.
How sad this is. How worthwhile it would be for each of us to examine our conscience
Qué tristeza.
and learn to say forgiveness.
We are proud that he didn't abandon us. He always loved indigenous, even though others humiliate us. We are proud to have the Pope with us.
It was needed. There are many indigenous problems. There always have been, and I think the Pope's visit was necessary.
And our correspondent now, Clayton Kahn, joins us there from Mexico. Clayton, quite a symbolic and in many ways the most important decision by the Pope there to allow services, allow Masses to be given in indigenous languages for the first time now. What else can you tell us about that decision and its symbolism, especially there in Mexico, where we know that there are so many indigenous languages there in Mexico? Clayton.
Cody, well, the reaction by most of the people, at least the population in Chiapas predominantly, has been very positive towards this decision by Pope Francis to allow for Mass to be held in indigenous languages. But like you mentioned, the symbolic gesture, the symbolic importance goes beyond that. The fact that Pope Francis went to Chiapas, a state that is predominantly indigenous, that has predominantly been the focal point of poverty and marginalization, and the fact that he went there and told the population there that the Church apologizes for the systematic exploitation, for the systematic marginalization of those populations, is a major break from the historic discourse and the historic dogma of the Catholic hierarchy of the Vatican. So the entire trip in itself has been a very important gesture, and it's also been very important to underscore that Pope Francis went to the tomb of former Bishop Samuel Ruiz, who died in 2011, who was the Bishop of San Cristobal de las Casas, one of the cities in Chiapas, in the 90s, the time when the Zapatista uprising occurred, which is an indigenous social movement that happened in the 90s. The actual reality that Pope Francis went to visit and pay homage to Samuel Ruiz, who was a defender of indigenous rights and also a champion of liberation theology, again breaks with sort of the traditions of the Vatican and the Catholic hierarchy. Now again, like I said, the reaction has been very positive from the indigenous populations there. For them, it's the first time that they're getting this kind of recognition from a leader, a world leader, a political leader, as well as a religious leader such as Pope Francis. However, roughly 100 indigenous leaders that were participating in that Congress there, while they did applaud and while they did embrace the message from Pope Francis and the overall sentiment, they said that words are not enough, that action needs to be taken into effect that world leaders as well as the politicians in Mexico need to take into account indigenous populations, as well as the rights of indigenous populations, the defense of their territory, their own autonomy, and recognition of their cultural roots and customs.
All right, Clayton Kahn there reporting on what is a historic, symbolic move by the Pope there. But as you were saying, many people say they should be followed up by actions from the Pope. Clayton Kahn, thanks so much.
Thank you, Cody.
And we go to Argentina now, where teachers there are speaking out against plans by the government of President Mauricio Macri to offer salary raises that are well under the nation's rate of inflation. Our correspondent Leo Poletti now reports there from Argentina.
Classrooms across the country reopened their doors for another year at the end of the month, and public school teachers are negotiating their wages for 2016 with the state. Traditionally, the round of wage bargaining of public teachers sets the trend for the salary negotiations of other sectors of workers in the coming months. Teachers' unions have rejected the proposal made by the right-wing governing Pro Party, saying that it is grossly insufficient.
We will continue demanding to negotiate further. If the government tries to close down talks condemning us to losing our buying power, then we have a horizon of industrial action ahead of us.
The right-wing pro-party that governs Argentina and some of its most important regions has offered an insignificant pay rise of 25%. Argentina faces an inflation rate of at least 50% in 2016. Workers are already feeling the brunt, and teachers know they'll have to struggle to put food on the family dinner table with such a weak pay rise.
We are asking the federal Buenos Aires City and Buenos Aires province governments, which are all led by the Pro Party, to give the workers a pay rise strong enough to recuperate the buying power lost in the last few weeks. Because food prices have gone up, rent has gone up, electricity has gone up, medicines have gone up, and public transportation will also become more expensive.
Teachers' unions have stated that negotiations with the government have broken down. The start of the school year, scheduled for Monday, February 29, looks under increasing jeopardy.
We are on the alert. That is why the last Argentine Workers' Central Union plenary session has been postponed until after the 24th of February, the date when the teachers' salary negotiations officially come to a close, because teachers will not be alone if they have to go out and struggle for their wages.
Public teachers are hoping the negotiations end well and that the school year commences without delay. If the negotiations do break down, they say they will be forced to go on a general strike. The public teachers that we have spoken to have explained of the absolute outrage they felt to see the Argentine government pay their vulture funds billions of dollars in cold hard cash, while on the other hand offering its public teachers ridiculously low wages, closing the doors to any further negotiations and triggering what could become a very long bout of industrial action. From Buenos Aires, Leo Poletti, teleSur.
Cuba and the U.S. will sign a landmark agreement on Tuesday to restore regular commercial flights between the two countries. Now, under the agreement, dozens of scheduled and charter flights are expected to begin service in the fall, ending a half-century U.S. ban. Tuesday's announcement will open a 15-day window for U.S. airlines to bid for rights to the new Cuba routes. The Brazilian state of Rio Grande do Sul has suspended the use of a mosquito-combating chemical following claims by Argentinian experts that the chemical, and not the Zika virus, is responsible for the increase in microcephaly. Now, according to the Argentines, a chemical larvicide there was introduced into drinking water in affected areas of Brazil in 2014 with the aim of killing mosquito larvae. Today is the anniversary of the death of Colombian guerrilla leader and Catholic priest Camilo Torres. Now, in commemoration of the event, we bring you this feature from our Colombian correspondent, Natalia Margarita.
The priest, the professor, the fighter. That's how Camilo Torres is remembered on the walls of the National University of Colombia, the place that saw him in his various facets. This building hosts what was the first school of sociology in Latin America. Camilo was a co-founder, but perhaps the biggest mark Camilo left on the university were the social programs that he took outside the campus.
It was there that the students of the National University of Colombia, led by Camilo Torres, met with the harsh reality of poverty, exclusion, inequality, and violence in the poor neighborhoods of the capital Bogota.
This is the place where Camilo Torres, the rebel priest, used to advocate for the poor and marginalized sectors of society. Now this same chapel is considered by many as the place where his remains should be laid. Fierce disagreements with the church institution led Camilo to quit the priesthood in 1965, the same year that the National Liberation Army, or ELN, emerged as a guerrilla force. Camilo would soon link up with them.
Camilo Torres began to feel all the weight of repression and political persecution by the then National Front government. He started feeling that his life was at risk, and on the 18th of October 1965 he began his irreversible journey into the ELN guerrilla army.
When you discuss with people that are members of the ELN, as I have done because I am a journalist, usually they repeat the same explanation. In Colombia, there is not ways for develop a political struggle in the legal ways.
Camilo died during his first combat, just 4 months after joining the ELN, but his long-standing involvement and political work among urban communities has been considered a central pillar of the ELN, the second largest guerrilla in Colombia after the FARC.
One of the difference between the FARC and ELN is the origin. The FARC was growing up in the rural area, thinking about the agenda of the farmers. But the ELN tried to combine the urban agendas and the rural ones. One of the biggest mistakes by the Colombian government is try to evaluate the power of the ELN only thinking about their military capacity, not the political capacity.
As peace negotiations with the FARC entered their final stage, the government and the ELN have been holding since January 2014 confidential talks aimed at defining the agenda and conditions for a formal public peace process.
FARC, government, and ELN are talking about the same country. For instance, the discussion about victims for FARC is an important point and is in the agenda for the ELN also. The level of the participation of the society is included in both agendas. The most important is the complementarity.
Negotiations with the ELN will certainly enrich the possibilities of peace from the point of view of the issues discussed and the legitimacy of the peace process. New spaces for the participation of society will also open up, because what Colombia can expect to see once the war is over is social mobilization and political participation.
50 years after Camilo Torres died at the hands of the military forces, Colombia's president has finally asked the army to search for and locate the rebel priest's remains, something the ELN had publicly asked the government to do as a sign of its commitment to a long-awaited peace process. Natalia Margarita, TeleSur, Bogotá.
And around the world now, Turkey and Israel are close to signing an agreement on compensation for the killing of 10 Turkish activists by Israeli commandos back in 2010. Now, according to AK party spokesman Omer Selik, Turkey has insisted there can be no normalization of relations between the two countries unless Israel meets Turkey's conditions for ending the Gaza blockade and agreeing to compensation for the deaths of the activists. Clashes between Palestinians and Israeli soldiers occurred again earlier today after more deaths at the hands of Israeli forces. With the latest now, our correspondent in the region, Noor Harrison.
During the past 24 hours, at least 4 Palestinians were killed in the West Bank by the Israeli forces in different incidents, including a 14-year-old Palestinian girl. Her name is Yasmin. This incident, especially the incident of the killing of the 14-year-old Yasmin, enraged Palestinian youth to clash with the Israeli forces in different cities and in around different checkpoints in the West Bank. Here in the Gaza Strip, Israeli forces opened fire toward Palestinian fishermen off the coast of Gaza City. No injuries were reported. However, this violation is considered one of hundreds of violations that happened since the ending of the latest Israeli operation on the Gaza Strip. No Palestinian fishermen were injured. However, they were forced to flee the area immediately.
Civilian casualties in Afghanistan rose to record levels in 2015. Now, that's according to a report released Sunday by the UN. Increasing attacks in populated areas are largely blamed for the rising violence there, which has killed or injured nearly 60,000 since 2009. Anti-government forces were responsible for more than 60% of those casualties. Women and children were the hardest hit. Spain's legislature will vote on March 3rd over whether Socialist Party leader Pedro Sanchez will be the next prime minister. Now, he needs an absolute majority or a simple one that would come 48 hours later. At least one person has been killed and several wounded in clashes between police and supporters of Ugandan opposition leader Kizza Besigye in Kampala. Now, this was the worst outbreak of violence since the start of campaigning for February 18th's presidential election. The former head of European soccer, Michel Platini, has appeared at FIFA's headquarters to appeal his 8-year ban from all activities in that sport. Now, the ban was over a $2 million payment he received from FIFA's president, Sepp Blatter, in 2011. Blatter will appear in court on Tuesday. Meanwhile, check this out. NASA has released a video montage of the sun's activity over more than 390 days. Now, the video was taken by NASA's Solar Dynamic Observatory. Scientists study these images to better understand the complex electromagnetic system that causes the sun's constant movement and how that may affect Earth. And that's what we're covering on this Monday, January 15th, here from our studios in Caracas, Venezuela. Be sure to follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We'll see you back here tomorrow.